All right, so let's get right into it. We're talking about Salim Javed. I mean, these guys were the most powerful, most celebrated screenwriting duo in the history of Indian cinema. They wrote the blockbusters that pretty much defined an entire era. But here's the twist, the central paradox. A lot of their greatest hits, well, they weren't exactly original. And listen to this quote. This is from the legendary Salim Khan himself. And it's his answer to people who said his stories weren't original. He didn't even deny borrowing ideas. Instead, he made this incredibly bold claim. He's basically saying, yeah, I took the story, but I'm going to add so much to it, you'll forget the original ever existed. He argued his work wasn't about copying, it was about transforming. And that idea right there is the core of what we're going to unpack. So that really is the big question, isn't it? Were they just really clever thieves? Or were they actual creative geniuses who understood something fundamental, that great art, it often builds on what came before it? Well, let's find out. Okay, so to really get the sheer scale of Salim Javed's revolution, you first have to understand the world they walked into. And honestly, it was a completely broken system, especially for writers. This was an industry that had basically zero respect for them. So think about Bollywood in the 1960s. It was all about the spectacle, right? You had your big, charismatic stars. You had your amazing, memorable songs, and you had these formulaic plots you'd seen a million times before. The story, the actual script, it was a total afterthought. And the writer? Well, the writer was treated like a munshiji, which is kind of like a clerk, just some guy hired to jot things down. They had no power, no prestige, and absolutely no creative control. And this little anecdote right here, it just perfectly captures the industry's mindset at the time. A young, hopeful Javed Akhtar, he goes to pitch a story. And get this, the producer's biggest fear, his main concern, is that the story is original. Can you believe that? The industry wasn't just uncreative, it was actively afraid of new ideas. It was a system designed to just recycle the same old stuff again and again. So, into this world, this creative desert, step Salim and Javed. And here's the brilliant part. They don't try to invent everything from scratch. No, instead, they become masters of the remix. They looked at the system, understood its rules, and then they figured out how to use those rules to create something completely new. Let's look at their first big hit, Hathi Mere Sathi. Now, it was a remake of a Tamil film, but they didn't just remake it. They totally supercharged it. The original was a pretty standard drama. What did they do? They injected a classic, high-stakes, rich girl, poor boy romance. And they made the elephant a key character who literally makes the ultimate sacrifice. They just piled on layers of emotion and high stakes, and it turned into an absolute box office monster. But even after delivering this massive, massive hit, get this, look at the pay disparity. They got paid a tiny fraction of what the music directors made. And that injustice, that's what fueled them. It became about more than just writing good stories. It became a fight for the writer's rightful place, for respect in the industry. And their technique was often so deceptively simple. Here's a perfect example, Sita or Gita. They took this super popular plot, you know the one, identical twin brothers separated at birth who swap places. It had already been a huge hit. Their big move? A simple but absolutely brilliant gender flip. It's the exact same plot, but by making the leads two women, the whole thing felt fresh, modern, and totally exciting. And you can totally see this technique evolving and getting more complex. In Yaad Ki Barat, they took the classic lost and found trope. Brothers get separated by some big disaster. But they elevated it. Instead of a random earthquake, the brothers are separated because their parents are brutally murdered right in front of them. So all of a sudden, it's not just a sweet story about a family reunion, it's a revenge-driven murder mystery, and a simple family song becomes this powerful emotional trigger, the key to finding justice. So, all of this work, all this practice honing their craft, it was all leading up to their most important creation, an archetype that didn't just change Indian cinema, it literally captured the soul of a nation. Now, to really understand this hero, you have to understand the times. The 1970s in India, man, it was a period of deep, deep frustration. The whole country was like a pressure cooker. Across India, from Bihar to Maharashtra to Bengal, people were just fed up. They were angry at a system they saw as completely corrupt and broken. There was this simmering rage just bubbling under the surface, waiting for an outlet.
And Salim Javed gave that rage a voice. They gave it a face, and his name was Vijay, the hero of Zanjeer. He was the angry young man. This wasn't your happy-go-lucky hero. No, he was brooding, he was intense, and he was completely fed up. He looked at the failed, corrupt system and basically decided to take the law into his own hands. He was exactly the hero the audience was desperate to see on screen.
And what's so powerful is that this character wasn't just some fantasy pulled out of thin air. He was born from reality. See, Salim Khan's own father was a police officer, and he used to share these stories about the sheer helplessness and rage that honest cops felt, being trapped inside a broken system. That real-world frustration was baked right into the DNA of the angry young man. And then came their masterpiece, Diwar. And of course, they went back to a classic theme, brothers on opposite sides of the law. It's a story that had been told before in films like Ganga Jumna. But what they did with that old theme, well, it was just pure screenwriting genius. Okay, just look at this example of their craft. This is where their mastery becomes undeniable. The screenplay tells the story visually, through these sharp, brilliant cuts. Picture this, one scene. A smuggler is praising young Vijay's potential for a life of crime. Then, bam, a hard cut to the next scene where a teacher is praising his brother Ravi's academic potential. In a single, powerful edit, their two separate paths, their moral destinies, are set in stone. That's just an incredibly efficient and powerful way to tell a story. But here's where the story gets really wild. Their influence didn't just stop at India's borders. The templates they perfected, the characters they created, they were about to go global and reshape cinema all around the world. I mean, this is just incredible. Just follow this chain reaction. First, Salim Javed wrote Diwar in 1975. A few years later, it gets remade in Hong Kong as The Brothers. That remake then inspires a young director named John Woo, and he goes on to make A Better Tomorrow, a film that literally revolutionizes the entire global action genre. It created the whole heroic bloodshed style that would influence everyone from Quentin Tarantino to the Wachowskis who made The Matrix. You can draw a direct line from a Bollywood script to the modern action movie. It's amazing. And the influence doesn't stop there. Fast forward to 2008. The screenwriter for the Oscar-winning blockbuster Slumdog Millionaire said he meticulously studied Salim Javed's work, especially Diwar, to understand how to tell the story of two brothers with opposite destinies. Even the director, Danny Boyle, called their work absolutely key to understanding the soul of Indian cinema. And don't think for a second this is just some dusty old film history. Look at the biggest blockbusters coming out of India right now. The hero in Javan, filled with outrage against a corrupt system, that is the angry young man updated for today. The hero of Pushpa, fighting for respect that society denied him, that is the DNA of Diwar. And Rocky from KGF, on a violent rampage to fulfill his dying mother's wish, that's a direct echo of Salim Javed's film Trishul. Their formulas aren't history. They are still the engine driving some of the biggest hits today. So that brings us right back to where we started. Were they thieves or were they geniuses? Salim Javed took old ideas, familiar stories, and they made them completely unforgettable. They prove that it's not always about where a story comes from. It's about where you take it. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If all great stories are, in some way, a remix, what's that little spark? What's that secret ingredient, that emotional core, that transforms a simple copy into a timeless classic?